Gwadar Port in Pakistan's Baluchistan province is located at the mouth of the Strait of Hormuz, one of the world's most vital waterways for seaborne oil trade. Funded, built, and operated by China, the deep-sea port at Gwadar was expected to become a major regional trade and transshipment hub. If the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, or CPEC, is regarded as the Belt and Road Initiative's flagship project, Gwadar Port has often been touted as CPEC's crown jewel. Yet almost 2 decades after the port began operations, business has been lackluster. Why is Gwadar underperforming, despite its importance to both China and Pakistan? You're watching the Diplomat Asia. In this episode, we discuss the significance of Gwadar Port geographically and geopolitically. We also explore the reasons for the underperformance of the port and ask a key question: is China losing interest in Gwadar? Gwadar was under Oman's control from 1783 to 1958, when it was purchased by Pakistan. For centuries, it had been a fishing village, but also an important node in the Indian Ocean's trans-regional maritime networks. Unlike Karachi, it was not a large port, but simply a stopover point where coastal voyagers docked to rest and replenish their supplies. Gwadar's potential to serve as a deep water port was first identified in 1954, when the U.S. Geological Survey studied the local coastline and found that it would be an ideal location for a deep water port. However, it was only in 1988 that Pakistan made its first attempt to build a port at Gwadar. Pakistan tasked a Belgian company to build a fish harbor in Mini Port there. That port was completed in 1992. However, it failed to take off due to a lack of market potential. Then, in May 2001, during his visit to Pakistan, Chinese Premier Zhu Rongji announced that China would underwrite a deep-sea port project at Gwadar. Construction began in March 2002 after Beijing agreed to provide $198 million of the $248 million required for Phase 1 of the project. The port opened for operations and the first cargo vessel docked in 2007. Meanwhile, in February 2007, Singaporean port operator PSA International won the contract to operate Gwadar Port for 40 years. However, it pulled out of the contract 5 years later. In February 2013, the Chinese state-owned China Overseas Port Holding Company took over port operations. China's control over Gwadar tightened following an agreement in 2017, under which the port was handed over to China Overseas Port Holding Company on a 40-year lease. According to media reports, the revenue-sharing structure was heavily skewed in China's favor. It would get over 90% of port revenues and around 85% of free zone revenues. Gwadar Port came under the CPEC framework in 2015. It is the gateway to CPEC, a connectivity corridor that links Gwadar Port to Kashgar in China's Xinjiang region. CPEC, in turn, is a key plank in the broader Belt and Road Initiative that China unveiled in 2013.
So when CPEC was launched a little over a decade ago, it was called the flagship of the Belt and Road Initiative. And Gwadar was seen as, by many, as the centerpiece. So you could say it was flagship of BRI. In practice, I think that assessment has changed almost totally on the Chinese side.
Over the past 20 years, China has invested over $1.6 billion in Gwadar Port alone. But in addition to the port itself, Chinese companies are undertaking projects to support development in the surrounding area: a smart city master plan, a desalination plant, a coal-fired power plant, a new international airport, and new roads. The total investment, much of it funded by loans from China to Pakistan, is well over $2.5 billion. Why is so much money being poured into Gwadar? The port's strategic location has given it immense significance. It is just 400 kilometers from the Strait of Hormuz, through which passes around 20% of the world's liquefied natural gas and 25% of seaborne oil trade. Gwadar Port sits outside the Strait of Hormuz, which means that it will continue to function even if the strait is blocked during a crisis. For China, there are dreams that Gwadar could also help overcome the so-called Malacca dilemma. Beijing has long feared that if the U.S. and its allies block the Strait of Malacca, its seaborne oil imports from the Persian Gulf and Africa would be hit hard. Part of the logic behind CPEC was China's drive to create overland transit routes for crucial energy supplies that cut out the Malacca maritime route. Gwadar and the proposed pipelines linking it to China is a key piece of that puzzle. Gwadar Port provides China with an alternate route, one that is also shorter and more cost-effective. While the sea route currently used for goods from the Gulf to China via the Malacca Strait is around 12,000 kilometers long, the distance from Gwadar Port to China's east coast via Xinjiang is just 6,500 kilometers. China also envisions that trade via Gwadar will contribute to Xinjiang's development. In addition, Gwadar Port could have military value for China. India and several Western countries believe that China has funded and taken operational control of Gwadar Port with a view to using it as a naval base in the future, although there's little evidence that that has actually happened.
The conditions that would have made it function viably on the commercial side would also have been conditions that would have made it an interesting option on the naval side. There are strategically interesting things about it as a location, but it's not essential even for Sino-Pakistani naval cooperation either. So I think all of the difficulties there that we see with Gwadar still kind of cast a pall over its viability as a military facility. It's still hard to see that changing in the near term, but it will always remain on the maps on the Chinese side.
Additionally, Baluchistan, the province in which Gwadar is located, is rich in natural resources including gold, copper, coal, chromite, and critical minerals that could be transported out of the port. Pakistan hopes to develop Gwadar Port into a regional trade and transshipment hub, which will also strengthen its own trade, not just with China, but also with Afghanistan and Central Asia. By drawing business to Gwadar, Pakistan is hoping to decongest the Karachi and Qasim ports, which currently handle over 95% of Pakistan's foreign trade. The government has also said that the development of Gwadar Port and the Special Economic Zones, or SEZs, around it will attract foreign investment into Baluchistan, boosting its economy and providing employment to the Baloch people. We spoke to an analyst from Gwadar about the port's impact on locals. They were keen to share their comments, but on condition of anonymity due to concerns about their personal safety. Have a listen.
For local people, things did change, in some ways dramatically, but not always in the ways they expected. Among the earliest and most important changes was connectivity. The 650-kilometer Makran coastal highway linking Gwadar to Karachi transformed mobility. Karachi is Pakistan's largest city, and before the highway it took days to reach it by a rough and unreliable route. When the port construction began in 2002, work on the highway also started. It opened in 2004. The road was primarily built to transport goods from the port, but it also changed civilian mobility. Today, daily passenger buses still take people to Karachi, especially for medical needs. News of the port also triggered a real estate boom. In the early 2000s, Gwadar barely had any two-story homes. The first property boom of 2003 to 2005, often called the Gold Rush, saw many locals become overnight millionaires by selling their ancestral lands within Gwadar, mostly in the outskirts of the city. Even fishing communities relocated for port construction were initially optimistic. Each family received a plot and funds to buy a house.
So far, Gwadar hasn't lived up to the lofty ambitions of anyone involved, the Chinese and the Pakistani governments or the local residents. Thanks for watching this far. If you're enjoying our content, visit thediplomat.com for comprehensive coverage of Asia-Pacific geopolitics. Use the link in the description for 10% off your first year's subscription. Business at Gwadar Port has been bleak so far. Citing marine traffic, a ship tracking and maritime analytics provider, a Deutsche Welle report pointed out that Gwadar Port's best year business-wise was in 2020, when 22 ships docked at the port. A comparison to other China-built ports is revealing. In 2023, just 17 ships docked at Gwadar, compared to 441 in Sri Lanka's Hambantota and 26 at Lekki Port in Nigeria. Notably, 2023 was Lekki Port's first year in operation. Gwadar Port has been open for business since 2008, and yet its turnover remains dismal. It is not that Pakistani ports are not doing good business. 1,767 ships docked at Karachi, Pakistan's largest port, in the 2023-2024 fiscal year. It handled 3/4 of Pakistan's total cargo. Neither is the Chinese operator to blame. even Singapore's PSA, which has considerable experience in running ports, was unable to boost business at Gwadar. Lack of infrastructure facilities has deterred shippers. Gwadar lacks dedicated feeder vessels to facilitate transshipment between Gwadar and Persian Gulf ports. Besides, Gwadar is operating at limited capacity. It has just 3 berths. Karachi has 33. It lacks rail connectivity, which is more fuel efficient and cost-effective for transporting shipments to other parts of Pakistan and China. Talk of a railway line between Pakistan and China has made no progress due to heavy costs. Nowadays, few people in China talk about Gwadar as a centerpiece of the Belt and Road Initiative.
Gwadar itself, I would say now, in the scheme of the Belt and Road, it is of only modest significance. CPEC itself, which was expected to add up to several tens of billions of dollars of investment, 56, 62, all sorts of different figures, I think basically topped out at about 25 in around 2017, 2018. And it's been pretty much stalled since then. And Gwadar itself has not ever turned into the kind of functioning port that some had hoped. But really, this was always going to be an extremely difficult proposition, and it's become harder over time as the security environment has deteriorated.
Foremost among the reasons for Gwadar Port's struggle to attract business is the dire security situation. Baluchistan, which is Pakistan's poorest and least developed province, has been racked by insurgency, unrest, political instability, and mass protests for decades. Militant groups have carried out several attacks in Baluchistan, including in Gwadar, targeting infrastructure and outsiders, that is, non-Baloch Pakistanis and Chinese workers employed in the project. The first attack targeting the Gwadar project came in 2004, when Baloch Liberation Army militants targeted a vehicle carrying workers to the project site, killing 3 Chinese engineers. Worryingly, the pace of attacks has increased in recent years. In August 2023, a convoy of vehicles carrying 23 Chinese engineers working in the port was attacked in Gwadar. In March 2024, militants stormed the Gwadar Port Authority complex. There have been countless other small and large attacks on CPEC's connectivity infrastructure.
A lot of these attacks, even if they're not taking place in Gwadar itself, are taking place in Baluchistan. Even if you protect the facilities, the port facility itself, and some of the key facilities in the city, is this a viable transportation hub? So I think the answer has been big question mark around that. Then there's been the question of, even in Gwadar itself, can you protect the key locations? So when you saw even the attack on the Pearl Continental Hotel, if you're not able to protect that, again, question marks over how secure the facility is for Chinese workers, for visitors, for anyone who's not operating in the most carefully guarded bits of it around the actual port facilities itself. And the problem is this has not been a contained threat. This is something that has intensified over time. So from the Chinese perspective, of course, this has made everything about it much more difficult, much more expensive, much more complicated, much more risky, and it's been unclear what you get out of all of that.
Not surprisingly, shipping lines are reluctant to send cargo to Gwadar. The reluctance of global insurance firms to cover shipments to Gwadar has raised costs, further deterring shippers from using the port. Meanwhile, locals are caught between their dreams of development and the realities of CPEC's implementation in a fraught security situation.
By 2005 or 2006, Gwadar came to symbolize the province's history of resource extraction without local benefit. Locals found themselves in an increasingly complex situation. They wanted development, like basic amenities, jobs, security, but were caught between militant groups who warned against accepting development, and state authorities who viewed locals with suspicion. In the aftermath of every attack, security forces raid homes, stop passenger buses, and detain young men on suspicion, a cycle that has severely disrupted local life. What was once a free and quiet fishing town has turned into an unpredictable and unequal place. Parents now fear for their sons' safety, anxious that they may be arrested on doubtful allegations or disappear altogether. At the same time, locals frequently question how, despite the heavy deployment of security forces and intelligence personnel in Gwadar and across Balochistan, insurgents are still able to carry out repeated attacks.
Opposition to the Gwadar port, which is strong among the local Baloch people, has generated a negative image of the project. Benefits of the port, whether in the form of revenue or jobs, have not reached the Baloch people, as contracts and jobs have gone to outsiders, Chinese companies and nationals, the Pakistani government in Islamabad, and non-Baloch Pakistanis. However, it is locals who are bearing the burden of Gwadar Port's development. For example, water consumption in Gwadar projects has deepened the water crisis in Gwadar town, and fishermen have been impacted by restrictions on their fishing in waters off the Gwadar coast.
With time, Gwadar's people realized that the infrastructure they celebrated was not necessarily built for them. The highway was designed for cargo. The new roads encircling the town were for aerial visibility during official visits, while inside the town the same broken streets and overflowing drainage remain to this day. Despite millions spent on dams and desalination plants, water scarcity persists. Electricity shortages continue due to limited supply from Iran. Trawling, overfishing, and illegal large vessel operations remain unresolved despite 2 decades of protests. Meanwhile, the Gwadar Development Authority, or GDA, faces widespread accusations of corruption. Today, people are exhausted by constant protest, yet feel they have no alternative.
The turning point came in January 2023, when hundreds of local residents of Gwadar, men, women, and children from fishing communities, gathered outside the port and the East Bay Expressway, blocking cargo movement and access to naval installations. Days earlier, Maulana Hidayat-ur-Rahman, the movement's leader, had warned Chinese workers at the port to leave. Around 500 were present at the time. Tensions spiked. A police crackdown led to the arrest of over 100 people, the use of tear gas and rubber bullets, dozens injured, and the death of a young police constable. The Maulana escaped and stayed underground for 2 weeks. Police raided the homes of protest participants. Section 144 was imposed for a month. Phone networks were shut down for a week. The internet was shut down for 2 weeks. As the atmosphere of fear deepened, large protests became less frequent. A few months later, the Maulana announced his candidacy in the provincial elections, something that shocked many, but also confirmed long-held suspicions. Many believed he had used the protests to build his popularity. Others thought the establishment facilitated his rise in order to end the movement. As an elected member of the provincial assembly, he could neither lead protests nor change long-standing problems. His popularity has since declined. If indeed the establishment supported him, it succeeded in neutralizing one of the largest protest movements in Gwadar's history. To be sure, Baloch people are not opposed to the Gwadar port per se, but to their exclusion from its benefits. The Baloch people's lack of ownership of Gwadar has added to the world's perception of the port as a failed project, and China may be considering cutting its losses. Reports in the media point to growing strains in the China-Pakistan relationship. Pakistan is concerned over Gwadar Port's failure to attract business and the slow pace of development at the Gwadar Free Zone. Such speculation gathered momentum in October when Pakistan pitched the United States on a plan to develop and operate a port at Pasni, just 131 kilometers away from Gwadar. While the Pasni Port project could simply be a dedicated terminal for U.S. shipment of critical minerals from Baluchistan, speculation is rife that Islamabad is tired of China's failure to produce profits at Gwadar. Is Pakistan turning to the U.S. to build another deep-sea port in Baluchistan as an alternative to the China-built port?
Pakistan has very successfully managed to pivot in the US-Pakistan relationship. It was in a dire state, and they have been able to effect a slightly stunning reversal since the conflict between Pakistan and India earlier in the year that provides a real opening for them to essentially regain their options. They had seen themselves falling further and further and closer into China's camp, as they were stuck with that in a sense because of the dynamics with the US. This gives them more space, which in some ways also puts a bit more pressure again on the Chinese side, because I think they've been fed up with the failures of CPEC. And so this is also part of a play to show that Pakistan has some other options as well. For now, of course, it's only really been an initial proposal on the Pakistani side. There's kind of raised eyebrows, I would say, on the Chinese side about some of this, but I'd still say all of this is too tentative to be treated as something that's going to have a big material effect.
There are reports that China is unhappy with Gwadar. The port had turned out to be a white elephant, something Beijing blames on Pakistan's failure to meet project deadlines and tackle the security situation in Baluchistan. China is also apprehensive over Pakistan's capacity to pay back its loans. While media reports claim that China's investment in Gwadar Port has stalled, it is more likely that it has slowed. Investment continues. In early August, for example, China's Xining Enterprise and the Gwadar Port Authority signed a letter of intent to significantly expand industrial and commercial ventures at the port and in its free zone. Gwadar and CPEC remain key in China's development plans for Xinjiang. Even if business at Gwadar does not pick up soon and substantially, China will ensure control over the port, given its strategic value for Beijing. Especially with the U.S. presence in Baluchistan likely to grow with its involvement in critical mineral extraction there, and plans for a U.S.-operated port at Pasny, China can be expected to dig in its heels at Gwadar Port. Importantly, there is no way China will allow or admit to Gwadar and CPEC's failure, as these are star projects of the BRI. Pulling out of Gwadar Port entirely is not an option. After all, CPEC's value to China is the access to the Arabian Sea that it provides. Without this port, CPEC's value to China would be much diminished. So the dream of Gwadar remains, despite how efforts to turn the city into a new Dubai have turned out.
Gwadar is symbolic, it's evocative. The image of conjuring a new port and city out on the Makran coast. And there's a reason we're still talking about it, and because it has the power to possess the imagination. Everyone's seen in China, look at Pudong, look at all of these locations that have been transformed from nothing into something very dramatic. I think there's still some dim hope on the Pakistani side at some point that maybe something magic can happen here. But even there, when I talk to people in the Pakistani government back in the day and in the years since, I'm not sure they were ever hugely convinced that if you did the economic assessments on Gwadar, that it was going to take off.
Thanks for watching The Diplomat Asia. Now you know all about the big dreams and dashed hopes for Gwadar Port. If you liked this video, check out our explainer on India's approach to the Taliban and Pakistan's reaction. Leave a comment below if there's a topic you'd like to see covered in a future video.